You do not charge a machine gun nest alone. You do not assault fortified positions with a fractured foot. And you certainly do not throw rocks at enemy soldiers armed with automatic weapons and expect to survive. For centuries, military doctrine had been clear about these fundamentals. Individual heroics were admirable, but they were also suicidal. The mathematics of warfare were unforgiving. One man against entrenched defenders with superior firepower was not courage, it was death. European battlefields were littered with the bodies of brave men who had forgotten this simple truth. The German Wehrmacht understood this rule better than most. Their defensive positions in the Italian mountains were masterpieces of interlocking fields of fire, carefully positioned to channel attacking forces into killing zones. Machine gun nests were sited to support each other. Mortar positions were dug deep into rocky hillsides, and snipers commanded every approach. The Germans had turned the Italian peninsula into a fortress, and they knew that individual American soldiers, no matter how brave, would break themselves against these positions like waves against stone. This confidence was not misplaced. The Italian campaign had already proven the deadly effectiveness of German defensive tactics. At Monte Battaglia, at San Pietro, at dozens of nameless hills, American units had bled themselves white, trying to dislodge determined defenders. The rule held firm. Modern warfare was about firepower and coordination, not individual heroics. But the Germans had made one critical miscalculation. They had never faced the warriors of the 45th Infantry Division. The 45th Infantry Division was different from other American units, though few people understood why. Officially, it was a National Guard division drawn from Oklahoma, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, states that most Americans considered backwater territories populated by farmers and ranchers. The division's patch bore a thunderbird, a Native American symbol that seemed quaint to European observers who measured military effectiveness by industrial capacity and technological sophistication. What those observers missed was the human element. Nearly 2,000 Native American soldiers served in the ranks of the 45th Division, representing more than 50 different tribes. These were men whose grandfathers had fought cavalry charges against repeating rifles, whose fathers had survived the systematic destruction of their traditional way of life, whose own childhoods had been shaped by stories of warriors who refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. The Creek Nation had produced some of the fiercest of these warriors. For generations, Creek fighters had been known for their individual initiative, their ability to read terrain, and their absolute refusal to retreat when their people were threatened. These were not romantic notions. They were practical skills honed by centuries of survival against overwhelming odds. Second Lieutenant Ernest Childers carried this heritage in his blood, but he had also been shaped by the modern world. Born in 1918 in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, he had grown up straddling two cultures, learning traditional Creek values from his elders while excelling in American schools and eventually earning a commission in the United States Army. At 25 years old, he was a quiet, methodical officer who led by example rather than rhetoric. By September 1943, Childers had already proven himself in Sicily, where the 45th Division had conducted its first amphibious assault. The fighting there had been brutal but straightforward. Beach landings, urban combat, pursuit of retreating German forces. Italy would be different. The Germans had chosen to make their stand in the mountains, turning every ridge and valley into a fortress. The Italian campaign was designed to be a sideshow, a way to keep pressure on Germany while the main Allied effort prepared for the cross-channel invasion of France. But sideshows have a way of becoming meat grinders, and Italy was no exception. The German decision to defend every mile of Italian soil had turned what should have been a rapid advance into a bloody stalemate. The 45th Division landed at Salerno on September 10, 1943, as part of Operation Avalanche. The beachhead was precarious from the first moment. German counterattacks came within hours of the landing, and for days the outcome remained in doubt. Only desperate fighting by units like the 45th prevented the Germans from driving the Allies back into the sea. But surviving the beachhead was only the beginning. As Allied forces pushed inland, they encountered the reality of fighting in Italian terrain. The peninsula was a defender's paradise. Steep hills, narrow valleys, and ancient stone buildings that could be turned into fortresses. Every village became a battleground, every ridge a killing field. The Germans had learned to maximize these advantages. Their defensive positions were carefully sited to take advantage of natural cover and commanding views. Machine gun nests were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire, making it impossible for attacking forces to find dead ground. Mortar teams were dug into reverse slopes, invisible to direct fire, but capable of dropping shells with devastating accuracy on any movement in the valleys below. For the soldiers of the 45th Division, this meant that every advance came at a terrible cost. Companies that started attacks with full strength would be reduced to platoon size within hours. Platoons would be whittled down to squads, squads to fire teams to individual soldiers crawling forward through the rocks and scrub brush, trying to find some way to break the deadlock. It was in this environment that the old rules of warfare began to break down. When conventional tactics failed, when firepower and coordination were not enough, individual initiative became the difference between success and failure. The Native American soldiers of the 45th Division, drawing on cultural traditions that emphasized personal courage and tactical flexibility, began to distinguish themselves in ways that surprised even their own commanders. But on September 22, 1943, near the village of Oliveto, one Creek warrior would shatter every assumption about what was possible on a modern battlefield. Ernest Childers had been walking on a fractured foot for 3 days. The injury had occurred during the brutal fighting at Salerno, when a German mortar round had exploded close enough to throw him against a stone wall. The medics had wanted to evacuate him, but Childers had refused. Company C of the 180th Infantry Regiment was already under strength, and he would not abandon his men for what he considered a minor inconvenience. The pain was constant now, a sharp reminder with every step that his body was operating beyond its normal limits. But pain was something Childers understood. His Creek grandfather had taught him that a warrior's strength was not measured by the absence of suffering, but by his ability to function despite it. The old man had fought in the Indian Wars, had seen his people driven from their ancestral lands, had watched an entire way of life disappear. If he could endure that, Childers reasoned, then a fractured foot was manageable. The 45th Division was pushing north from Salerno, trying to break through the German defensive lines that blocked the road to Naples. Every mile was contested, every hill a fortress. The Germans had turned the Italian countryside into a maze of killing zones, using the natural terrain to channel American attacks into carefully prepared ambushes. Oliveto was one of dozens of small villages that dotted the mountainous landscape between Salerno and Naples. To most observers, it was insignificant, a cluster of stone houses clinging to a hillside, home to perhaps a few hundred Italian civilians who had long since fled the fighting. But to military planners, Oliveto commanded a crucial piece of high ground. Whoever controlled the village controlled the valley below, and whoever controlled the valley controlled the road that the 45th Division needed to continue its advance. The Germans had been preparing their defenses around Oliveto for weeks. The 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, veterans of the Eastern Front, had turned the village into a fortress that seemed impregnable to conventional assault. Machine gun nests were positioned to cover every approach, their fields of fire carefully calculated to create overlapping zones of death. Mortar teams were dug into positions on the reverse slopes, invisible to American observers but capable of dropping shells with devastating accuracy on any movement in the valley below. The German commander had chosen his positions with the cold precision of a chess master. The main approach to the village was a narrow valley that funneled attacking forces into a natural killing zone. Secondary approaches were blocked by steep terrain and carefully positioned obstacles. Any American unit that attempted a frontal assault would be cut to pieces before it could close with the defenders. But the Germans had made their preparations based on conventional American tactics. Massed infantry attacks supported by artillery and air power. They expected the Americans to follow their doctrine, to rely on firepower and coordination rather than individual initiative. This assumption would prove to be their fatal mistake. The German soldiers manning the positions around Oliveto were experienced veterans, but they were also exhausted. Months of fighting in Italy had worn down even the best units, and the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division was no exception. They had been in continuous combat since the Allied landings, falling back from one defensive line to another, always outnumbered, always under pressure. Still, they retained their professional competence and their confidence in their defensive positions. The machine gun teams knew their sectors of fire by heart. The mortar crews had pre-registered targets throughout the valley. The snipers had identified every piece of cover that might conceal an approaching enemy. They were ready for anything the Americans might throw at them, anything conventional. On the morning of September 22, 1943, Company C of the 180th Infantry Regiment received orders that seemed designed to get them all killed. They were to advance up the valley toward Oliveto, locate and destroy German defensive positions, and secure the village for follow-on forces. No artillery support was available. The guns were needed elsewhere. No air support was promised. The weather was too poor for close air support missions. It was, by any reasonable military standard, a suicide mission. The company had already been reduced to less than half strength by the fighting at Salerno. The men were exhausted, their equipment was worn, and their ammunition was running low. They were being asked to assault prepared positions defended by veteran German troops with nothing but their individual weapons and their courage. Ernest Childers studied the terrain through his binoculars, his fractured foot throbbing with each heartbeat. The German positions were clearly visible on the hillside above, dark rectangles that marked machine gun nests, the glint of metal that revealed sniper positions, the carefully camouflaged mounds that concealed mortar teams. It was a textbook defensive position, the kind that military academies used to teach the futility of frontal assault. But Childers was not thinking like a military academy instructor. He was thinking like a Creek warrior, trained from childhood to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. The German positions were strong, but they were also predictable. They covered the obvious approaches, but they might be vulnerable to an attack that came from an unexpected direction. More importantly, the Germans were thinking in terms of unit tactics, companies and platoons moving in coordinated formations. They were not prepared for individual action, for a single warrior who might slip through their defenses and strike at their weak points from within. Childers made his decision with the calm certainty that had characterized his leadership since Sicily. He would not send his men into the killing zone below. Instead, he would go himself, alone, and find a way to break the deadlock that conventional tactics could not solve. The Creek nation had always understood that warfare was ultimately about individual courage. Tactics and strategy mattered, but in the end, battles were won by warriors who were willing to risk everything for their people. This was not recklessness. It was a calculated acceptance of risk in service of a greater good. Childers had grown up hearing stories of Creek warriors who had faced impossible odds and found ways to prevail. His grandfather had told him about fighters who had slipped through cavalry patrols to strike at supply trains, who had used terrain and weather to turn the tables on better-equipped enemies, who had refused to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. These were not just stories. They were lessons in tactical thinking that emphasized flexibility, initiative, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. The Creek way of war was not about following doctrine or waiting for orders. It was about seeing opportunities and seizing them, regardless of the personal cost. As Childers prepared to move out, he was drawing on centuries of accumulated wisdom about how to fight against superior numbers and firepower. But he was also applying the modern training he had received as an American officer, the technical knowledge of weapons and tactics that would allow him to translate ancient principles into contemporary action. The combination would prove devastating to the German defenders, who had prepared for everything except a Creek warrior operating by rules they did not understand. But in September 1943, near the village of Oliveto, one man would prove that the old ways still had power, that individual courage could still change the course of battles, and that the warriors of the 45th Infantry Division were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The morning air was cold against Childers' face as he began his approach to the German positions. He had left his men in a covered position 500 yards down the valley, with orders to wait for his signal before advancing. If he failed, they were to withdraw and report that the position was too strong for a frontal assault. If he succeeded, they would know by the sudden silence from the German guns. Childers moves carefully through the rocky terrain, using every fold in the ground to mask his approach. His fractured foot sends jolts of pain up his leg with each step, but he forces himself to maintain a steady pace. Speed is less important than stealth. The Germans have positioned their sentries to watch the obvious approaches, but they cannot cover every possible route through the broken ground. The first German position comes into view after 20 minutes of careful movement. It is a machine gun nest carved into the rocky hillside, positioned to command the main approach to the village. 2 soldiers are visible behind the weapon, their attention focused on the valley below where they expect the American attack to develop. They have not seen Childers, who has approached from their blind side using a dry creek bed for concealment. Childers studies the position for several minutes, noting the angles of fire, the location of ammunition supplies, the probable escape routes the Germans would use if their position became untenable. This is not the random violence of a desperate assault. This is the calculated stalking of a predator who has identified his prey and is choosing the moment to strike. The German machine gunners are professionals, but they are thinking in terms of unit tactics. They expect to engage American infantry advancing in formation across open ground. They are not prepared for a single enemy soldier who has infiltrated their defensive perimeter and is now positioned to attack them from behind. Childers draws his service pistol and moves into position. The range is less than 30 yards. At this distance, with a clear field of fire and no time pressure, he cannot miss. But the moment he fires, every German position in the area will know his location. He will have perhaps 60 seconds before mortar rounds begin falling on his position, perhaps 90 seconds before German infantry begin converging on him from multiple directions. He fires twice in rapid succession. Both German soldiers collapse over their weapon. The machine gun that had commanded the valley approach is silent. But Childers is already moving. The sound of his pistol shots echoes across the hillside, and he can hear German voices shouting commands in the distance. They know they have been infiltrated, but they do not yet know by how many men or from which direction the attack is coming. This confusion is his greatest asset, but it will not last long. The second German position is a sniper's nest built into a natural rock formation 50 yards up the slope. Childers can see the muzzle of a rifle protruding from the shadows, but he cannot see the man behind it. The sniper has heard the pistol shots and is scanning the area below, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. Childers knows that a direct approach is impossible. The sniper commands too much open ground, and any movement across that terrain would be suicide. But the position has a weakness that its occupant probably does not realize. The rock formation that provides such excellent concealment also limits the sniper's field of view. There is a blind spot on the left side of the position, a narrow corridor of dead ground that might allow an approach. The approach requires Childers to crawl across 30 yards of broken rock, while a German sniper searches for targets less than 50 feet away. One careless movement, one loose stone, one moment of inattention, and he will be dead before he can react. But this is exactly the kind of challenge that Creek warriors had been training for since childhood. Moving silently through hostile territory was not just a military skill, it was a survival technique that had kept his people alive for generations. Childers begins his crawl, moving one limb at a time, testing each handhold before committing his weight to it. His fractured foot is screaming with pain, but he forces himself to ignore it. Pain is temporary. Death is permanent. The choice is simple. The German sniper is good at his job. His rifle sweeps back and forth across the terrain below, pausing at each piece of cover that might conceal an enemy soldier. But he is looking for movement in the obvious places, not for a single man crawling through the rocks at the edge of his peripheral vision. After 10 minutes that feel like hours, Childers reaches the base of the rock formation. The sniper is directly above him now, less than 20 feet away. Childers can hear him breathing, can hear the slight scrape of metal against stone as he adjusts his rifle position. But the German still does not know he is there. Childers reaches into his equipment and pulls out a hand grenade. But as he prepares to pull the pin, he realizes that the explosion will alert every German position in the area to his exact location. He needs a different approach, something that will eliminate the sniper without revealing his position to the other defenders. He looks around and finds what he needs: a fist-sized rock, smooth and heavy. It is not a weapon that any military manual would recommend, but it is silent, and in the hands of someone who had learned to hunt with thrown stones as a child, it can be devastatingly effective. Childers stands slowly, the rock balanced in his right hand. The German sniper is focused on the valley below, his rifle trained on a piece of cover where he thinks he has detected movement. He has no idea that death is standing 20 feet behind him. The rock strikes the German soldier in the back of the head with a sound like a melon dropping on concrete. The man collapses forward over his rifle, unconscious or dead. Either way, he is no longer a threat. But the sound of the impact has attracted attention from the third German position. A mortar team dug into a concealed position on the reverse slope of the hill. Childers can hear voices calling out in German, asking for a response from the sniper position. When no answer comes, they will investigate. Childers has perhaps 2 minutes before German infantry arrive at his location. He uses the time to examine the sniper's rifle and ammunition supply. The weapon is a Mauser K98K, the standard German sniper rifle, equipped with a telescopic sight. 92mm ammunition. This is the moment when Childers' modern military training combines with his traditional Creek heritage to create something unprecedented on the Italian battlefield. He is no longer just infiltrating enemy positions. He is turning their own weapons against them, using their equipment and their tactical positions to destroy their defensive network from within. The German mortar team is positioned in a shallow depression on the reverse slope, invisible from the valley below, but vulnerable to fire from the sniper position that Childers now controls. Through the telescopic sight, he can see 3 German soldiers clustered around their weapon, still calling out to their missing comrade. Childers adjusts the rifle sight and fires. The first German soldier drops. The other 2 scramble for cover, but they are in an open position with nowhere to hide. Childers fires again and again. Within 30 seconds, the mortar team that had commanded the entire valley approach is eliminated. But now every German position in the area knows exactly where he is. Rifle fire begins snapping through the rocks around the sniper's nest. Voices shout commands in German as infantry squads begin moving to surround his position. Childers has perhaps 90 seconds before he is overwhelmed by superior numbers. He abandons the sniper position and begins moving toward the village itself, using the confusion and the terrain to mask his movement. The Germans are converging on the rock formation where they last saw muzzle flashes, but Childers is no longer there. He is moving through their defensive perimeter like a ghost, striking at targets of opportunity and disappearing before they can react. If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage and sacrifice deserve to be told, and by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. The 4th German position is a machine gun nest positioned to cover the main street of the village. It is the strongest point in the defensive network, manned by 4 soldiers and equipped with an MG-42 machine gun capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute. Under normal circumstances, it would require a coordinated assault by an entire platoon to eliminate this position. But circumstances are no longer normal. Childers has already eliminated half of the German defensive network, and the remaining defenders are confused and demoralized. They know they are under attack, but they do not know by how many men or from which direction the next assault will come. Childers approaches the machine gun nest from the rear, using the village buildings for concealment. The German soldiers are facing outward, watching for an American assault from the valley below. They have not considered the possibility that the enemy might already be inside their defensive perimeter. The range is less than 40 yards when Childers opens fire with the captured German rifle. His first shot kills the machine gun team leader. His second shot wounds the gunner. The remaining 2 soldiers scramble for cover, but they are in an exposed position with limited options for escape. One of the German soldiers throws a hand grenade in Childers' direction, but the range is too great and the explosion harmlessly showers him with debris. Childers responds with aimed rifle fire, methodically eliminating the remaining defenders until the machine gun position falls silent. But the grenade explosion has revealed his position to the remaining German forces in the village. Rifle fire begins coming from multiple directions as the surviving defenders attempt to pin him down. Childers realizes that he has pushed his luck as far as it will go. It is time to signal his men and complete the mission. He fires 3 spaced shots into the air, the prearranged signal for Company C to begin their advance. Then he takes cover behind a stone wall and waits for the cavalry to arrive. The sound of American voices echoes across the valley as Company C begins its advance. But they are not advancing into a storm of German machine gun fire as everyone had expected. Instead, they are moving through positions that have fallen mysteriously silent, past weapon emplacements that no longer pose a threat. Childers watches from his concealed position as his men move up the slope toward the village. They advance cautiously, expecting ambush at every turn, but the German defensive network that had seemed so formidable an hour earlier has been systematically dismantled. The machine gun nests are silent. The sniper positions are abandoned. The mortar teams that had commanded the valley approaches are no longer responding to radio calls. But the mission is not yet complete. Intelligence reports indicate that a German observation post is positioned on the high ground above the village, manned by a forward observer who has been directing artillery fire throughout the sector. As long as that position remains operational, any American advance beyond Oliveto will be met with devastating artillery barrages. Childers knows that his men will need time to consolidate their hold on the village before they can organize an assault on the observation post. But time is a luxury they do not have. German reinforcements are already moving toward Oliveto, and if the observation post is allowed to continue functioning, it will direct artillery fire that could destroy Company C before they can establish defensive positions. The observation post is located on a rocky outcrop 300 yards above the village, accessible only by a narrow trail that switchbacks up the steep hillside. It is the most defensible position in the entire German network, chosen specifically because it could not be approached without being observed and engaged by the defenders. But Childers is no longer thinking in terms of conventional approaches. His success against the other German positions has come from doing the unexpected, from attacking from directions that the defenders had not anticipated. The observation post may be impregnable to a frontal assault, but it might be vulnerable to an attack that came from an entirely different angle. Childers studies the terrain above the village through his captured German binoculars. The observation post is built into a natural rock formation that provides excellent protection from direct fire. But the position has one potential weakness. A steep ravine runs along the eastern side of the outcrop, hidden from the observation post by the angle of the rock face. If someone could climb that ravine without being detected, they might be able to approach the position from its blind side. The climb would be treacherous under the best of circumstances. The ravine is nearly vertical in places, with loose rock that could give way without warning. But Childers' fractured foot makes the ascent even more dangerous. One misstep, one moment when the injured foot cannot support his weight, and he will fall to his death on the rocks below. But the alternative is to allow the German observation post to continue directing artillery fire against his men. That is not acceptable. Creek warriors did not abandon their people when the fighting became difficult. They found a way to prevail, regardless of the personal cost. Childers begins his climb, moving slowly and carefully up the treacherous slope. Each handhold must be tested before he commits his weight to it. Each foothold must be chosen with care, favoring his uninjured foot whenever possible. The pain from his fracture is constant now, a sharp reminder that his body is operating beyond its normal limits. The German observation team consists of 3 men: a forward observer with radio equipment, a security guard with a rifle, and a radio operator who maintains contact with the artillery batteries. They are positioned on a small platform carved into the rock face, with an excellent view of the valley below, but limited visibility to their flanks and rear. The Germans are focused on their mission of directing artillery fire against American positions throughout the sector. They have been calling in fire missions for hours, adjusting the fall of shot to maximize casualties among the advancing American forces. They are professionals doing their job with deadly efficiency, but they are not expecting to be attacked in their seemingly impregnable position. Childers reaches the base of the rock formation after a climb that has taken nearly an hour. He is now less than 50 feet from the German observation post, but those 50 feet represent the most dangerous part of his entire mission. The final approach requires him to cross open rock face where any movement might be detected by the German security guard. But Childers has one advantage that the Germans do not anticipate. The afternoon sun is positioned directly behind the observation post, creating deep shadows on the eastern face of the rock formation. If he times his movement correctly, he can use those shadows to mask his approach until he is close enough to strike. Childers waits until a cloud passes over the sun, deepening the shadows on the rock face. Then he begins his final approach, moving with the fluid grace of a predator closing on its prey. His fractured foot screams with pain as he puts his weight on it, but he forces himself to ignore the sensation. Pain is temporary. The mission is everything. The German security guard is scanning the valley below through binoculars, watching for signs of American movement. The forward observer is bent over his radio, calling in another fire mission against targets near the village. The radio operator is adjusting his equipment, trying to maintain clear communication with the artillery batteries. None of them are watching the shadows on the eastern face of their position. Childers reaches the edge of the platform without being detected. He is now close enough to hear the Germans speaking, close enough to see the details of their equipment and weapons. Those are Childers' own men, advancing through the village below. There is no time for careful planning or tactical consideration. Childers draws his service pistol and steps onto the platform. The German security guard turns at the sound of his movement, but he is too late. Childers fires 3 times in rapid succession. All 3 German soldiers collapse. But eliminating the observation team is only half of the mission. Childers must also destroy their radio equipment to prevent other German units from using the position. He smashes the radio with the butt of his pistol, then throws the pieces over the edge of the cliff. The German artillery network that had been directing devastating fire against American positions throughout the sector is now blind and deaf. The silence that follows is profound. For the first time in hours, there is no sound of incoming artillery fire, no crack of sniper rifles, no chatter of machine guns. The German defensive network that had seemed so formidable that morning has been systematically destroyed by a single Creek warrior operating alone behind enemy lines. Childers looks down at the village below, where his men are consolidating their positions and preparing for the next phase of the advance. Company C has taken Oliveto with minimal casualties, a feat that conventional military wisdom had deemed impossible. But the cost of that success is written in the pain that shoots through Childers' fractured foot with every step, in the exhaustion that threatens to overwhelm him now that the adrenaline is beginning to fade. He begins the long descent back to the village, moving carefully down the treacherous slope. His mission is complete, but the war continues. There will be other villages, other defensive positions, other impossible missions that someone will have to undertake. But for now, for this moment, the warriors of the 45th Infantry Division have proven that the old rules of warfare do not apply to men who refuse to accept defeat. The German commanders who receive reports of the action at Oliveto will struggle to understand what happened. Their defensive positions had been carefully planned and expertly constructed. Their troops were experienced veterans who knew their business. Yet somehow, a single American soldier had infiltrated their entire network and destroyed it from within. The German High Command will not believe that one man, operating alone with nothing but standard infantry weapons and unbreakable determination, could have accomplished what an entire battalion should have found impossible. But the warriors of the Creek Nation had always understood something that military academies did not teach. Warfare was ultimately about the human spirit, about the willingness of individuals to risk everything for their people. Technology and tactics mattered, but in the end, battles were won by men who refused to accept the limitations that others imposed on them. Ernest Childers had proven that lesson once again on the rocky slopes above Oliveto. But his war was far from over, and the 45th Infantry Division would need every one of its warriors before the fighting in Europe finally came to an end. The German defensive network in the Oliveto sector had been designed by professionals who understood the mathematics of modern warfare. They had calculated fields of fire, positioned weapons for maximum effectiveness, and created interlocking zones of death that should have stopped any conventional assault. But they had not planned for a Creek warrior who operated by different rules, who saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles, who refused to accept that some missions were impossible. That failure of imagination would cost them far more than a single village. It would cost them their confidence in the defensive systems that they had spent months perfecting, their belief that American soldiers could be stopped by superior firepower and tactical positioning. Most importantly, it would cost them the psychological advantage that came from knowing that their enemies would follow predictable patterns of behavior. The warriors of the 45th Infantry Division had just announced that they would not be following anyone's rules but their own. The news of what happened at Oliveto spread through German command channels like wildfire, but the reports made no sense. A single American soldier had somehow penetrated a carefully constructed defensive network and eliminated multiple positions without support, without artillery, without air cover. The German officers reading these reports assumed they were dealing with incomplete intelligence or exaggerated accounts from demoralized troops. But as similar incidents began occurring throughout the Italian theater, a disturbing pattern emerged. American units, particularly those with high concentrations of Native American soldiers, were achieving tactical successes that defied conventional military logic. Individual soldiers were infiltrating positions that should have been impregnable, eliminating defenders with a combination of stealth, marksmanship, and sheer audacity that German doctrine had not anticipated. The psychological impact on German forces was immediate and profound. Defensive positions that had seemed secure suddenly felt vulnerable. Sentries found themselves scanning not just the obvious approaches, but every shadow, every fold in the terrain, every possible route that a determined infiltrator might use. The confidence that came from superior positioning and firepower began to erode as German soldiers realized they were facing enemies who did not follow the expected patterns of behavior. German intelligence officers struggled to understand what they were encountering. They could not comprehend that they were facing something far older and more fundamental. Warriors who had been trained from childhood to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles, to move silently through hostile territory, to strike without warning and disappear before their enemies could react. The success at Oliveto earned Ernest Childers the Medal of Honor, but more importantly, it established a template that other Native American soldiers in the 45th Division would follow throughout the Italian campaign. At Anzio, Cherokee warrior Jack Montgomery would lead a desperate bayonet charge that saved his company from annihilation. In the mountains near Cassino, Choctaw soldiers would use traditional hunting techniques to eliminate German sniper teams that had been terrorizing American positions for weeks. Each success built upon the last, creating a reputation that preceded the 45th Division wherever they fought. German commanders began to recognize the Thunderbird patch and adjust their defensive plans accordingly. But adjusting for the unexpected is nearly impossible when your enemies refuse to be predictable. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual battles. The 45th Division's success rate in assaulting fortified positions became a subject of study at the highest levels of Allied command. Military observers noted that units with significant Native American representation consistently outperformed expectations in situations requiring individual initiative and tactical flexibility. But the true measure of the division's transformation could be seen in the confidence of its soldiers. Men who had been dismissed as National Guard amateurs now carried themselves with the quiet assurance of proven warriors. They had learned that conventional wisdom was not always correct, that impossible missions were sometimes just difficult ones that required unconventional solutions. These measures included increased patrol activity, overlapping security zones, and rapid reaction teams positioned to respond to penetration attempts. But by then, the psychological damage had been done. German soldiers had lost their faith in the invincibility of prepared positions, and that loss of confidence would haunt them for the remainder of the war. The 45th Division continued its advance through Italy, fighting at Anzio, participating in the liberation of Rome, and eventually landing in southern France as part of Operation Dragoon. In each campaign, the lessons learned at Oliveto were applied and refined. Native American soldiers became the division's unofficial specialists in impossible missions, the men who were called upon when conventional tactics had failed and desperate measures were required. The division's reputation grew with each success, but so did the cost. The 45th Infantry Division would eventually serve 511 days in combat, longer than almost any other American unit in the European theater. They would suffer over 26,000 casualties, a testament to the intensity of the fighting they endured. But they would also earn a reputation as one of the finest combat divisions in the United States Army, a unit that could be counted on to accomplish any mission regardless of the odds. The transformation that began with Ernest Childers' lone assault at Oliveto had turned a collection of National Guard soldiers into something unprecedented in modern warfare, a unit that combined traditional warrior culture with contemporary military technology to create a fighting force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Germans had learned to fear the Thunderbird patch, but they never truly understood what they were facing until it was too late to matter. Ernest Childers survived the war, but the war never left him. After receiving the Medal of Honor from President Franklin Roosevelt in a White House ceremony in April 1944, he returned to combat with the 45th Division. He fought through the remainder of the Italian campaign, participated in the invasion of southern France, and was present when his unit made one of the most horrific discoveries in military history. On April 29, 1945, the 45th Infantry Division liberated the Dachau concentration camp. The warriors who had proven their courage on a dozen battlefields found themselves confronting an evil that defied comprehension. Childers, now a battle-hardened veteran of nearly 2 years of continuous combat, later said that nothing in his military experience had prepared him for what they found behind those gates. The liberation of Dachau became the final chapter in the 45th Division's European service, a reminder that their fight had been about more than tactical victories or strategic objectives. They had been fighting to preserve human dignity against forces that sought to destroy it. For Native American soldiers like Childers, men whose own people had faced systematic persecution and cultural destruction, the discovery of the Nazi death camps carried a particularly profound meaning. Childers returned to Oklahoma after the war, but like many combat veterans, he struggled to readjust to civilian life. The quiet confidence that had made him such an effective warrior in combat became a burden in peacetime. He worked various jobs, started a family, and tried to build a normal life, but the memories of Oliveto and Dachau never faded. He rarely spoke about his Medal of Honor action, deflecting questions with the characteristic modesty of his generation. When pressed for details, he would simply say that he had done what needed to be done, that any soldier in his position would have acted the same way. But those who knew him understood that his actions at Oliveto represented something more than individual heroism. They represented the continuation of a warrior tradition that stretched back centuries. The 45th Infantry Division was deactivated in 1968, but its legacy lived on in the men who had served in its ranks. The Native American soldiers who had proven themselves in the mountains of Italy and the forests of France returned to their communities as living links between ancient warrior traditions and modern military service. They had demonstrated that courage was not bound by technology or doctrine, that the human spirit could still triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Jack Montgomery, the Cherokee warrior who had earned his Medal of Honor at Anzio, became a successful businessman and community leader in Oklahoma. Like Childers, he rarely discussed his wartime service, preferring to focus on building a better future for his family and his people. But his example inspired a new generation of Native American military personnel who understood that service to country was also service to their tribal communities. The broader impact of the 45th Division's service extended far beyond individual recognition. Military historians studying the unit's combat record identified tactical innovations that would influence American military doctrine for decades. The emphasis on individual initiative, the willingness to attempt unconventional solutions to tactical problems, and the integration of traditional skills with modern weapons became hallmarks of elite military units throughout the Cold War and beyond. But perhaps the most important legacy of warriors like Ernest Childers was the demonstration that American strength came not from uniformity, but from diversity. The 45th Division succeeded because it brought together men from different backgrounds and cultures, each contributing unique skills and perspectives to the common mission. The Creek warrior who threw rocks at machine gun nests, the Cherokee leader who charged with bayonets fixed, the Choctaw hunters who stalked German snipers. All were Americans, all were warriors, all were essential to victory. Ernest Childers died in 2005 at the age of 87, one of the last surviving Medal of Honor recipients from World War II. His funeral was attended by military officials, tribal leaders, and ordinary citizens who understood that they were saying goodbye to a man who had embodied the best of both his cultures. He was buried in his hometown of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, not far from the Creek Nation lands where his grandfather had taught him the warrior's code. Today, the story of the 45th Infantry Division serves as a reminder that heroism comes in many forms, that courage is not the exclusive property of any single group or culture. The Native American warriors who served in its ranks proved that ancient traditions could find new expression in modern conflicts, that the values of honor, courage, and sacrifice transcended the boundaries of time and technology. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. The warriors of the 45th Infantry Division fought for 511 days across 7 major campaigns, from the beaches of Sicily to the gates of Dachau. They proved that the American military was strongest when it embraced the full diversity of the American people, when it recognized that different cultures brought different strengths to the common cause of freedom. Thank you for ensuring that Ernest Childers and the 2,000 Native American warriors of the 45th Infantry Division do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.